In this lesson, we want to look at improvised rappelling techniques. Now, this fits into climbing self-rescue because a question that I know I hear a lot and certainly comes up in different courses is what happens if you drop your belay device? So whatever you're using to rappel, like your ATC or ATC guide or whatever belay device you're using to rappel, what happens if you drop it? Now, some other lessons will teach some other ways to get down with a single rope rappel, but there's also ways to improvise a rappel. And so I'll show you a progression of ways to improvise the rappel. One of them that we start with is just the arm wrap. And so here we put the rope around our neck and then we wrap the rope around our arms. Now, this is a technique that's not going to work on 5th class terrain or anything steep, but it's a technique that comes in handy when you're doing some low angle terrain. And this is particularly relevant like in mountaineering or sometimes in alpine climbing, where you might just have some short low angle steps that you want to do a quick rappel on. And the idea here is that you can just quickly wrap your arms around it and provide yourself some security as you go down. I think about this in the climbing world, particularly like in rock climbing, where you have, particularly in ice climbing, where you have vertical ice, but then maybe like a snow at the base. And I see a lot of times people walking down that base that, it's typically kind of snowy, maybe some ice in there. It can be a little awkward, especially in crampons. And a lot of times they look kind of uneven. And if they were just to throw on a quick arm wrap, they can do a quick little rappel down that low angle terrain and add some security. So that's one way. And again, not for vertical rock climbing 5th class terrain. This technique next, the Dulfer sits, this is the original rappelling method that was used for decades. And so here, you're going to put your rope going from your anchor in between your legs. And the way I like to think about this is where your load is going to be focused, and that's where you want to put it, where your belay loop is. And then you're going to wrap it around your leg. I'm a righty, so I go around my right leg. And then you wrap it across your chest, over the shoulder, and then your brake strand is here. And your braking plane is across your body. Now, we don't use this as much anymore in climbing, and you can see here, you can rappel some pretty vertical terrain, and climbers did that for a long time. This being my braking plane. What you're going to find is today, with our thin synthetic clothing, this is going to burn into your body pretty quick. When climbers really use this for years, they tended to have big leather, wool, canvas, pretty heavy duty clothing. And they used to even sell jackets with leather patches up here on the shoulder for this. And today you can still use it. I use it primarily when I'm ice climbing, so I have a lot of clothes on, a lot more layers compared to just a t-shirt. This isn't going to work great with a t-shirt on. I'll even share a picture on Canvas of Warren Harding's rappelling vest. He had kind of a custom-made vest he made. There's a great picture of it in the most recent issue of Ascent magazine. Pretty cool, but you can see how it's really durable and it would work for that moving rope. And part of the idea there too is you think about how we used to belay, and we used to do a lot of hip belays, right? And we can still do those. We still do them a lot in the alpine, and it's great to know how to use those things. And we still use things like shoulder belays, right? Over the shoulder belays here, where my climber would be down here. And so hence the clothing that climbers used to use was really more built for that. The clothing we use today is less built for that. Unless, like I said, you're doing things like ice climbing or maybe alpine climbing, where you have a lot more clothing on than, t-shirts and shorts. So those are a couple improvised rappel techniques that don't involve devices. Next, in the progression of things here, we can use a munter. Okay, a munter is totally appropriate. Okay, and so here I can build a munter either on my harness or in the air, and I can use a munter. If I'm going to use this to rappel, I can still extend this, put a friction hitch back up on, but there I can rappel with my munter. Okay. One thing that's going to happen with this is it's definitely going to twist your rope. We often see this as a method of least resort, but we have pretty limited materials that are involved. Just one big locking carabiner is what we need. Another classic method is the carabiner break. And it used to be called the 6 carabiner break because if you look at old Freedom in the Hills books, like what I learned with, they were using oval carabiners. They would put them opposite and opposed, and they would use 6 carabiners. Now today you'll see climbers more commonly refer to it as just the carabiner break. And what it involves is using 3 locking carabiners. And so here I've put 1 locking carabiner on my belay loop. I've got another locking carabiner on my belay loop here. And how I like to think of this is this now is my, this is the carabiner that I would normally be putting my belay device on, and then the 3rd carabiner becomes that belay device. So one of the principles here with all these methods is you're just adding friction, and that is the very fundamental principle behind belaying anyway. And that's why I mentioned how we used to belay with hip belays and shoulder belays, that they're all just methods of adding friction. So here now, I want my rope running on the spine side of the carabiner on this. And now my brake is up, but it's just more natural to have it down. And if I want to brake, I'm going to bring it up. If I'm going to rappel with this, I'm going to still extend it and put a 3rd hand friction hitch on my belay loop, or at least put it off my leg loop, which is less ideal, but I do have a harness here that doesn't have a speed buckle, so it's still really secure. So that's the carabiner brake. There's many ways to improvise rappelling, and I've heard of climbers using things like hexes. I've tried it, and I tend to find that it doesn't work that great because it feels like it's the cord gets in the way. They tend to be kind of long, a little awkward, but instead you can take a rappel ring, and this can be a really slick improvised rappel because it's smooth, it takes 2 ropes really well, and you use it just like a device. And what I ask you to consider is I pulled out an old figure 8, and you look at a figure 8 and you look at what it is, and it's basically just a piece of metal, and that's what we're doing. Even a ATC device, again, it's just a piece of metal with slots in it that are there just to add friction. And if you look at the early plate belay devices that came out, they were literally, that's why they're called a plate, it was essentially just a plate of metal. There's not much to them. So hence, we can use a rappel ring. If I was going to rappel in this, again, I would extend it, put a 3rd hand friction hitch on my belay loop. But I can rappel just with that rappel ring. There's a lot of argument to be made for why you should carry a rappel ring with you or a quick link. I always do anytime I'm climbing, whether it's single pitch or multi-pitch, mostly just to leave behind if I find like an old rappel ring that's getting worn, or maybe someone took it or it's gone, or just it needs it. So sometimes you just are climbing routes and you know the fixed hardware there isn't in great shape. So you can also use a rappel ring. This fits 2 ropes a little bit trickier, but it'll work. I most commonly carry a quick link with me on a climb. I less commonly carry rappel rings, but either way, I like to carry something like this with me, so if I need to leave it or replace some fixed hardware. So there, again, I can improvise a rappel device. And again, same thing, I would extend this and put a 3rd hand friction hitch on below it, as always. So those are some improvised rappel techniques. So if you drop your rappel device and you don't know how you're going to get down, there you go.